Hey, welcome everybody. Feel free to keep getting food if you're getting food. I want to thank you guys for coming. This is our first AngularJS meetup, and I'm actually shocked how many people showed up tonight. This is awesome. Thank you, thank you. I'm super excited to share this library framework. Mishka will tell you it's neither of these things. Oh, hey, my soundtrack went away. I thought that was me. We've been working on AngularJS for about 2.5 years now, and we're getting very, very close to our 1.0 release, and we think it's ready for you guys to come take a serious look. Some of you have been developing with us for a long time. How many of you folks have been coding since 0.9? A couple of us, I know. Okay. For those of you guys who are new, again, I'm super excited to welcome you here. Igor, Mishko, Vojta, and our new intern, hey, welcome, Brian. They're here to answer questions, and they're going to give some presentations. But please, we're going to structure tonight. We're going to have some presentations. After the presentation, we're going to have some time for questions. When you come up for questions, please come up to the mic and ask us anything. And T-shirts. We have T-shirts? Yeah. Yes. So for people who ask questions, we're going to have some nice prizes for you if you want to. So I also want to make a point. So you can see, like, Mishko is wearing one of our vintage Angular shirts. This is pre-logo. So we're giving away the vintage stuff tonight. All future Angular wear will have the new Shield logo. So you can be there, one of the people who were there before it really became big. So with that, I'm going to ask Mishko to come up. Mishko is the original designer of Angular, and he's going to walk us through some of the basics.
The original crazy man. Well, thank you everybody for coming. This is super exciting. I love to see so many people here. So we want to talk about, this is really the basics of AngularJS, and I really want to convey the notion or the how we are different from most of the things out there. And so the tagline we currently have is that it is HTML enhanced for web apps. Now, I know you're looking at it and you're wondering, like, what does he mean by that? And so really the presentation is about explaining this one tagline. And so as I go through it, I want you to think back about this tagline, about what it really means. So what do I love about HTML? This is what I love about HTML. I'm super excited about this. And that is that if you want to do hello world in HTML, you just put a p tag around it, right, the paragraph, and it renders. Like, this becomes that. Right? It's super simple. I can't imagine a simpler hello world. Like, this is as simple as it gets. And then we introduce JavaScript. And, well, we can't just, this is basically we're saying, we want to put the text, the hello world, inside of this thing. So we have to give an ID. And then this is the hello world. Like, what happened? This is insanity. Like, this got to be the most complicated hello world I've ever seen. Now, there's a couple of things going on in here. First of all, you have to understand all this baggage of browsers and how they render, and you have to be like, oh, yeah. So I can't just get a hold of something because I might not actually, the document might have not been loaded yet. So I have to delay looking for the document until the document is loaded. So there's this add listener window load. And then you have to get a hold of something in a web, and it's, get element by ID, that's greeting. And the trouble becomes that your code is littered with this information about how to get stuff. And finally, you can't just write those things because different browsers are different, so there goes all these different checks for our beloved IE. So this got to be the most complicated Hello World app there is. And there is not just complicated number of lines of code you have to write, but really the amount of stuff you have to understand the browser is. And so what we set out to do is we wanted to set out to fix this. Now, there's a lot of wonderful libraries out there, namely jQuery, that's super popular, that fixes many of these things that are shown on this particular page. But if you think about it, it doesn't fundamentally fix the understanding of how browsers work. You still have to delay loading of your method until after unload. You still have to fetch your IDs. You still have to write to DOM. It's basically much nicer syntax, the syntax that should have been in a DOM from the very beginning, but fundamentally it's still the same complexity. So enter AngularJS. So what is AngularJS? Well, we make you include a little script tag, and we put our code in here. But what we do here, the differences here is that we basically allow you to do binding. And so you put double curly where you want the greeting to go. And you need to have a context of where the greeting comes from. So typically we have a controller. And so you say, well, this p tag is going to be controlled by this other code over here. And let's click behind and notice how much simpler it is. It simply says, look, there's a controller. I'm going to get a hold of the scope. I'm going to assign the variable to it, and that is it. A couple of things to notice that are missing here. So the first thing that is missing is that there is no main method. In other words, there is no, oh, I have to wait until the DOM is loaded thing. That just simply disappears. You're simply telling what you want to do. The second thing that is missing out of here is that there's no special APIs to call or implement. There's nothing special. I mean, this scope object that's being passed in might as well be just an empty hash. And because we don't depend on any APIs, or because we're not making you call any APIs, the code you write is really pure. Like what's in here is just pure behavior. And lastly, what's missing is all of this code of how do I get a hold of things inside of the DOM. So if you look at this, what we're getting back to is this world of declarative world, which is I'm going to tell you what I want you to do, and you figure out all the pieces behind it. You need to figure out, when are you ready to render, when the DOMs are ready, how do you get a hold of the DOM elements, how do you write into the DOM and all the other pieces to go with it. In other words, the only thing you have to worry about is giving me the behavior, and in this particular case, the only behavior is setting the greeting variable. So now this is great. This data binding is great, but I want to take a little detour first. Everybody knows the spreadsheet, right? And the cool thing about spreadsheet is that you can have two numbers, width and height, and you can say equals, and you can say A2 times B2, and it computes 200, right? That's a basic assignment of saying, this is those two things. But the cool thing about spreadsheets, the thing that really took off and made spreadsheets such an indescribable part of the business world, is that you can go back and you can edit numbers, and you can say 25. And that automatically updates the formula that's over here. And this live updating is what makes Angular cool. So when I have, for example, a little demo here, that you have an input and you say, hello, your name, and this your name comes from the model over here, it's not just at the beginning copy this particular value, but all the times in the future. So Angularians, I don't know how to spell that, maybe? I declare that from now on you are all known as Angularians. What's cool about it is that this live data binding happens all the time. Now, what would it require to do inside of jQuery? Well, inside of jQuery, not to mention that you have to wait until the onload event happens and get a hold of the input box, and then you have to register a click event, the key down event, which then you have to remember you can't read the value until the browser processes it, so you have to do set timeout 0. Did I lose anybody yet? All right. The point is there's a lot of things you would have to do to get this behavior, but what you really want to do is simply declare it, right? You want to simply say, look, this thing over here is that thing over there. And that's the beauty and the power of Angular and data binding, right? So what is on the bottom of all this magic is really the power of data binding. And it turns out that this is not obvious. We get endless numbers of questions on our mailing list that basically come along the lines of, how do I do X? How do I get a hold of the DOM element? How do I write to the DOM? And we're like, no, it's the data binding, right? So now let's look at it a little further and look at little parts over here. So first, we have this thing called ng-app, and that simply says, hey, this portion of the DOM is going to be controlled by Angular so that you don't have to worry about the bootstrap process. The next piece we have is this ng model, which basically says assign whatever the input is to your name variable. But this works, keep in mind, this works in both directions. So if I write into your name, I'm going to update the input box, and vice versa. If the user interacts with the input box, it will update the your name. And finally, you say what the data binding should happen. And this simple code gives you this behavior without any other script tag to any other JavaScript. So now let's do a little more complicated case. So here we have a to-do list. Every demo's got to have a to-do list, right? So attend meetup and hit enter. And notice what happened is now it says we have 3 items remaining, and we can check that off. Yeah, we have attended meetup, and then maybe we can archive it, right? So this is a very simple behavior that we have achieved over here. So let's have a look. We have ng-app that kind of gets the thing going. We have our behavior, which we placed in to-do.js. We'll go over that in a second. We have our style sheet. And what we're saying is that this div tag, which is where most of our application lives, is going to be controlled by the to-do controller. And again, we're going to go through the behavior of that in a second. And notice how you have double curlies everywhere, which basically shows the items remaining. In this particular case, we're showing off that it could actually be a function. It could be a computed value. You can bind to arrays. When you click archive button, you're actually calling a method archive inside of your controller. And my favorite directive out of them all is this ng-repeat. Now, this is a magical directive that you're going to learn to love. How many of you guys already love the ng-repeat? How many think that's the best thing since sliced bread? All right. So ng-repeat is awesome because what it does is it turns this li into a template, which can be cloned as many times as you have items inside of to-dos. And so what happens is simply by adding or removing items into this to-dos array, you're affecting how many LIs you have in the UI. So when I enter attend meetup and hit enter, all I've done over there is added the particular string into the array, and that automatically caused the UI to update and create new LIs. Notice we can use data binding inside of classes as well. So we can, for example, there's a to-do. When I click this checkbox, you see how it becomes struck through. The way that works is that we have simply an input checkbox, which is bound to to-do done. So this becomes true or false. And then we simply bind true or false into this particular class. So we have done-true, done-false. And we have a CSS that simply says, oh, done-true. Well, put a line through it and make it gray. But you get the idea. So let's go look at the controller. And so this is a controller behind it. Notice we just simply initialize an array over here of items inside of a to-do. Now this is a good point to kind of stop and think about this for a second. Notice that the array, which is our model in this case, the to-dos, is just a plain old JavaScript object. There's nothing special about it. We're not making you inherit from some model class. We're not making you write some kind of special getter and setter methods or use some kind of special accessor methods to access this particular array. This is a regular JavaScript array that you're all familiar with. And this is an important point because what it means is that you can easily integrate with third-party libraries because most third-party libraries will give you, well, plain old JavaScript objects. So any library that forces you to wrap your object in some kind of proxies that have getters and setters is going to be hard to integrate with third parties because of this wrapping mechanism that has to happen, and maybe the third-party library retained the reference to this object and it's updating the object behind the scenes without using the special API, which then causes your UI to be stale. So this is an important thing to remember, is that we're just dealing with plain old JavaScript. Again, notice that there is no special API in this file. So let's just go further. Add to do is what gets executed when I click this button. And notice how this thing works. All I'm doing is I'm simply adding using the push method, which is all familiar to everybody who's using JavaScript, and I'm adding an object whose text property simply comes from scope to-do text. The to-do text is bound to this particular input box. And then after I add it, I want to reset the input box. So I simply assign an empty string to it, and all the right stuff happens automatically. Remaining was shown before, which simply shows the count of number of items you happen to have. And archive simply goes through a list of items and skips any item that's already been done. So if I hit archive, it removes the items from the array that's already been done. So I cannot stress just how important it is that there is no APIs that we force you to call or or classes that we force you to implement. This is the biggest differentiator and something that seems subtle or even not important, but it actually makes a huge difference for large applications. So this is the kind of the magic of putting controller or behavior behind the DOM. So your DOM represents your template, what you're working with, and you put code behind it, and the code that's behind is free of any kind of DOM manipulation. The only thing we're caring about here is about the model. And the HTML becomes kind of the projection of how do I get from the model to the DOM, to the UI. And this projection is updated automatically and all the time. So at any point when you change the model, the projection changes as well. Now there's a second point to be made over here, is that what you're seeing over here is HTML. It is not a template in a sense that this is not placed in some kind of a script tag or in a string or anything like that. This is HTML that gets loaded and parsed by the browser into a DOM and then transformed using Angular. And this is an important thing to realize, because most other libraries that are MVC libraries or try to solve the same particular problem, they deal with strings and string templating. So most libraries do take a string, they take a data, they merge the two and they produce a new string, and then they inner HTML that into somewhere inside of the DOM. And while this works perfect the first time around, what happens if you need to change the data? At this point, you have to go and re-merge it and do inner HTML again, and then chances are you're clobbering something user has been doing over there. So for example, if there's an input box, you just clobbered the user. And if the input box had text in it and the user was typing into it, you lose focus and you will lose the cursor position. So these subtle differences become a problem once you start building bigger applications. So we don't deal with strings, we deal with DOM. So at no point are we doing any kind of string manipulation or string concatenation or anything like that. This is all about doing DOM transformation. And that's, again, a very important difference from the other libraries that are out there. But we also want to embrace what HTML is. Right? We don't want to say, hey, HTML is broken or CSS is broken. It's all about taking what HTML is and enhancing it. And so, for example, one thing that works really well inside of the web is the idea of deep linking. That is, you have a URL, and when you click on it, you can go to a different URL, and that loads a different page. And then you can bookmark that URL or send it to your friend, and then when they visit that URL, they're exactly in the point of the application where you left off. Right? This is something that our users have come to expect from us, but this is something that is broken in most Ajax applications, because the definition of Ajax application is that you're not doing a round trip to the server, and so the whole deep linking becomes broken. So let me show you a simple transition. Here's a list of items. First of all, let me show off how cool the ng repeat is. So here's our list. Notice that we have our input that has search. And then we have an ng repeater that simply runs a filter through search and orders it by name. And notice as I'm starting to type, the number of items automatically shrink. And when I delete it, they automatically go back to the original list. Now that's super powerful stuff that you can do with just a couple of keystrokes of saying, filter by a search. But let's get back to the original thing, which is when I click on a particular link, and let me get the URL bar going over here. Notice it says /list, which is the list of items in here. When I click on a link to transition to a different page, notice that the URL actually changed. Similarly, I can go back using the back button, and I go back to the previous page where I have been. And so there's a couple of things to make this work. First of all, inside of our list.html, when we're inside of a repeater, which is right here, notice that we're using href, and we are computing the href from, I'm sorry, this is not the edit one, this one right here. It simply says, go to the edit / and then the ID that we have inside of our object. Now, why is this important? Because the way you transition between pages is the way you would do this inside of normal web application, is that you transition through links, and that creates a history. Now, if you're building an Ajax application in some other technology, what you would do is you would register a click handlers on all these ahrefs. And actually, they wouldn't even have anything inside of the href because it's meaningless. So things like, for example, hitting Apple or Control if you're on Mac, and then clicking a link, which opens up a new tab, in most Ajax application is broken. But in our application, it directly goes into, it goes into the edit mode of this particular thing because we have properly embedded everything inside of the URL. So there's certain things that just work out of the box. Now, how does that work? Well, we allow you to define what we call routing information, which is basically here. What should happen if we have /list, /edit project, /new, otherwise redirect back to the list. What we have done here is we have taken what people already know, which is the concept of round tripping and the concept of different pages, and people already know how to build applications this way. But we have brought all this this paradigm into building an Ajax application. So you're programming as if you had round trips, but actually it's all happening inside of the browser, so it's seamless. So what you get out of it is deep linking URLs kind of out of the box without any kind of effort. So notice, this is basically all one had to do inside of Angular to define this thing. Now let me show you a couple of other cool things. For example, here's a list controller which gives you the list of all the items inside of here. So notice I write it into the projects, and when I go back to our list, the ng-repeat is what I'm iterating over is a list of projects, right? So that's how the projects gets over there. Now, again, if you've done JavaScript programming for a while, you should be saying, hey, something's missing over here. What's missing? Anybody? What's missing is the callback. That's correct. Project query is talking to a server and fetching a list of items. Where is the callback? Well, what we do is we have futures. What we're returning over here is an object that eventually will contain the data that we have. But for now, it's just kind of a shared reference that we will eventually populate when the server returns. You can still put a callback in here, but this is where the magic of data binding starts to shine. What we're saying over here, say, go fetch the list of items you have in a database, and data bind it to the ng-repeat, which then initially renders nothing, and at some point in the future, the data shows up, ng-repeat kicks in, and fills the items inside of the repeater, right? So something as simple as a list controller becomes really, really trivial because you simply say what you want to say, nothing more, nothing less. No need to update the DOM, no need to write a callback. Make the simple stuff super simple. So we covered fetching the data, we covered how we get deep linking for free. Notice how throughout the system we try to be declarative as much as we can. We try to, instead of you having to program all of these nuances, we simply trying to allow you to say, tell us what you want to do, and we'll just try to do the right thing out of the box for you. The other thing I want you to notice is this magical, where are these things coming from, this scope project and so on? Well, it turns out we have something called dependency injection, which means that any controller can ask for any other object within the system. And dependency injection is super cool because it's great for testability. So for example, if you wanted to unit test this list controller, well, you'd simply say new list controller, and you could easily pass in a mock scope and a mock project. Well, actually, mock scope really just means an empty hash, and then simply assert that there's an array being placed on a project's property of the hash, and you can simply assert that the project.query got called, right? So this is great for testability, but more importantly, it gives structure to your application. It allows you to simply say, look, for the list controller to work, I need these objects, and it's not my problem how do you get it. You simply go and look it up. What it means is that the way the application is structured is declarative. And the nice thing about it is you don't have to write the main method. Every application that you have ever written has a main method. And in JavaScript, the main method is kind of implicit. It's the outermost scope of a script file, right? But it's kind of the thing that bootstraps the whole thing and gets it going. And usually that main method is scary, for lack of a better word. I don't know if you've done any big projects, but if you have, I'm sure the main method is scary. It's untestable. Nobody knows how it has gone there because typically it grows organically. There is no rhyme or reason why things are done in a particular way. It's just kind of how the project grew. People added things where they kind of fit in, and then the next thing we know is we have this multi-headed beast. I see the smiles, so I'm seeing that a lot of people are shaking their heads like, yes. Well, we got rid of the main method here. There is no main method. Because dependency injection assembles the app for you. You simply tell me what all of your objects are, and you simply say, when you're loading a particular controller, the controller says, I need these objects in order to get my work done. And it's really not either your or the controller's problem on how these objects are gotten. So in this particular case, we're saying we're depending on this thing called a MongoLab module, and in here we're declaring a project. In this case, it's a class. That's not important. The point is, we can declare these objects, and we call them services, and then we can simply ask for them inside of where is the code? Inside of the code. Now, think about the implications. It means that you can change the way the application is assembled for example, inside of your unit tests. So let's say you're writing some test and you always want to pretend that the application is always authenticated. You don't want to go through authentication process. Wouldn't it be great if you could just replace the authentication module with something else, or get a hold of the authenticated user and make him super user, so within your tests you can easily navigate to all the parts? You can do that with dependency injection. But I've saved the last piece for the best part for last. So let's talk about components, and really let's talk about the simple concept of what we mean when we say HTML is Angular is HTML enhanced. Typically, when you're building a UI, for example, we have these nice tabs over here that show different tabs and different list of things when you click on them. And these tabs are usually, I'm sure you can understand that they require probably some complicated set of divs and classes and structure and so on, right? And so there's some web designer who basically designed these pretty tabs, and now it's your job as a web developer to put the structure everywhere within your application. Wouldn't it be great if in HTML you could simply say what you mean, which is that you have a tab, and then the tab is made out of panes over here, and then it's finished? And then this would render into the individual components, right? This is what we mean by when we say we want to enhance the HTML. And so notice we have a simple definition over here that says, oh, you come across tabs. I'm not going to go through the details of it all. Go and expand it into this complicated set of divs and ULs and ng repeaters and click handlers and everything else that has to happen. Similarly, when you come across a pane, this is how you expand the pane into the stuff so that it renders properly. So from the developer point of view, I can simply say what I mean, which is tabs and a pane, and this is my title, and everything happens the way it should. So what at the core of what Angular is, it's not as much an MVC framework as it is a framework for building yourself an ideal framework for your problem. It's a meta framework. It's a way of designing the language that makes it perfect for you building the app that you want. So all these things we call directives, and it turns out that all these that you can see over here, tabs, pane, ng controller, ng repeat, and the data binding, the double curlies, all of these things we call directives. And it turns out they're all extensible in Angular. In other words, you can write your own and do anything you want with them. It turns out that while we were writing all of the ng repeat directives that we give you, which we think that are useful out of the box, they're using the same APIs that are available for you. So you can, there's nothing special magic happening for us. There's no special API that we have that we don't expose for you for building this special vocabulary for yourself. So in summary, hopefully I answered the question. Is what I mean is that AngularJS is HTML enhanced for web apps. And I wanted to kind of reiterate a couple of cool things that makes it different, which is we really focus on HTML and making it a declarative way of expressing yourself. The code you write is free of any kind of inheritance, any kind of objects, any kind of third-party libraries that you're forced to, which means the code is reusable. We have dependency injection, which has profound implications, especially for large applications. For toy applications, there's not much value in it, but the moment you get something interesting and big, dependency injection is godsend. And finally, it's all about extensibility, so that if you don't like what Angular does, or if you would really wish Angular did a new trick, you can teach it. So Angular is a way of matching up your behavior to a specific HTML construct that you want to translate into some specific behavior, whether it's a controller, whether it's a data binding, whether it's a tab or component. And I think with that, questions? A microphone, please, if you'd be so kind.
I think this will maybe be covered in the subsequent presentations, but if you look at that last example, like the tabs one, how would you, if you were going to do that with test-driven development, how would you kind of approach that problem?
You're going to run a demo? Okay, so Igor's going to show you a demo of that, so just hold on to that.
Thanks.
I have a question regarding dependency injection.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to write an app using Angular and you wanted to test an app in an environment that didn't have the DOM,
Mm-hmm.
say in Node, using say Jasmine Node,
Mm-hmm.
how hard is the DOM binding in AngularJS? Could you pass in your mocks using services, or do you have to rely on, say, constructor injection?
Very good question. So it turns out everything is dependency injection in the system, and so the root document where Angular binds to is also injectable, and so you can inject a mock into your services. That's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is if you look at most of the controllers, with the exception of directives, because they're by their very job manipulating the DOM, if you look at the controllers, whereas most of your application logic lives, there is no reference to DOM anywhere in there. So these things should just out of the box be able to run inside of Node, and you should be able to unit test them.
Okay.
So we've done a lot of pieces to make sure that you come into contact with the DOM as little as possible, so that you can focus on the behavior and not worry about how do I do this with respect to the DOM.
But can I use the service framework inside of Node, or is Angular and the service framework bound to a browser environment?
You mean like the dependency injection? Yes, you should be able to do that. The tricky part is you would need to mock out the document.
Okay. Okay.
But as long as you were injecting, or as long as you're instantiating controllers or injecting services that do not require any kind of DOM manipulation,
the code wouldn't rely
they should
on
just
the DOM.
work straight out of the box in Node.js, because there's no reference to DOM in there.
Alrighty, thanks.
Hey, so you show example how your links has this hash symbol. Is it work with HTML5 history
It
API?
does. It's a very good question. So if you actually go to our documentation, this is our documentation. Notice when I click, this is without hash. In order to have something without hash, it requires server to cooperate so that the right things get served up.
Yeah.
But as long as the server is cooperating, we have a location service which keeps track of all these things, and you can put the location service into HTML5 mode. And not only do these URLs work, we're actually, if you take this URL and you paste it to somebody who opens up in a browser who doesn't have a URL, we'll translate it to a hash mode so that person can do normal browsing. And if that person takes a hash URL and sends it to somebody who has HTML5 history, we'll retranslate it back into normal URL. So the whole HTML5 story is nicely figured out thanks to Vojta. Where is Vojta? That man over there has done an amazing job on figuring this out.
Okay, so one more question, probably it's easy. Is it like single page app friendly framework? I think yes, from what I see.
It's all about single page apps.
Yeah.
It's all about Ajax. It's all about loading your application once, and then all of the transitions that you have, which I showed you with routing and deep linking, all that stuff, all that happens without ever refreshing the page.
Okay, and very last questions. What is it, like your background server side is like Java mostly?
I'm sorry?
What is your background? What
What's
was
my background?
Yeah, like-
Mostly Java,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, okay.
Why,
Thank
because
you.
of dependency injection?
Yeah, just I figure out this from the talk. Thank you.
You're going to like dependency injection.
Is anyone doing Angular Dart?
Good question. Yes, I think we have somebody looking into it. My understanding currently, the issue, there's a very early prototype kind of just toying around. The issue, Sean, going to say something? Oh, okay. I thought you had maybe had something to say about Dart. Our current understanding is that Dart does not yet support reflection, but they're planning on adding support for it. So as of right now, the whole reflection thing is kind of tricky. But as soon as they add it, there should be no reason why we can't. For example, we work with CoffeeScript rather well.
Thanks.
You had an example there where you were pulling up the data from Mongo. How do you handle synchronizing back? Like, for example, if I was offline or something like that and I wanted to...
Yeah, that's kind of out of the scope of the framework. You're welcome to add some services to it and share the community, but that would not be part of the framework.
Okay, can you develop Chrome extensions and apps with
Yes,
the
we
new
can.
content security policy?
Yes, it's Igor will probably tell you more about it. Yes, the answer is yes to all that stuff. We're actually working with the Chrome team right now to make sure that happens. Igor?
Did you ask about CSP?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just recently added a mode where we can work within CSP. You need to opt in because there are some slight performance implications, but
Okay.
everything still works and you can build Chrome apps. Yeah.
Okay, so during development, do you have to do something?
You just need to use ngCSP. So if you remember, there's ng app directive that you put on the root element. So in addition to that, you put ng CSP, and everything just works.
Okay, and do you remove that after development?
No, this stays.
That's okay.
Yeah. So the performance implications are very minor, but we still want to use everything we got on browsers that don't.
Okay, so there is a slight performance hit.
Yeah, but it's not significant. Don't worry about it.
Okay. And the other question is there any require mechanism or compatibility with CommonJS?
No, so there's no. So we have concepts of modules, and people oftentimes get confused between them. Modules is a way of our internally kind of dealing with global variables, because we hate global variables. We don't want to have any in there. So it's a way of kind of boxing our application. There has really nothing to do with module loading systems like AMDs. I can't remember the acronym, like require. But there have been people who've added the two together, and so they should work just fine. They're really two separate things. They have nothing to do with each other. So you can use something like $require to put assemble your JavaScript code and then hand it over to Angular once you have it assembled.
Okay, so there needs to be some initialization, and then I inject those.
The only thing you can't, yes. So the only thing you can't do is you can't use ng-app because of the onload thing. You have to manually bootstrap, because we don't know when the require is done loading all of your pieces. So you simply have to tell us like, oh, everything's loaded, you can go now.
Right. So what require does, it loads all the scripts and handles all that stuff, figures out the dependencies and the load order. And this usually happens asynchronously, and we cannot rely on the DOM content loaded event to figure out when we can start doing our stuff. So you need to tell us, like, require.js is done loading all the stuff. Go ahead and boot the application.
Okay, thank you.
These are excellent questions. I love it.
So I have, I have more questions about dependency injection.
Go for it.
So what was your inspiration for do you have a background with Spring or with Juice?
No, I have a background with Juice, but my real inspiration is that I have a huge amount of background in unit testing and test-driven development. And dependency injection is all about not hardwiring your dependencies and rather just asking for your dependencies, and that has huge implications for testability. And one thing we wanted to make sure that our framework does above other people is that we want to make sure that we're test friendly. You know, we don't. When you build Angular application, we have our opinions about how you should be writing tests, and we provide you all of the frameworks, all of the runners, and all of the assertion frameworks. We even provide you mocks, something that most other frameworks don't do. And so one of the ways we have all these things is through dependency injection. So for example, if you are trying to test HTTP request, what you really want is you want to have an HTTP backend that's fake, so that you can set up expectations and responses and then just assert in your test that these things are happening without actually making HTTP requests. So if you're using something like jQuery $Ajax, well, how do you intercept calls to $Ajax? There's no way to do that. But if you have dependency injection and you simply say, well, I need a HTTP service, then inside of your unit test, you can easily say, well, here's a fake one, so that you think you're talking to the backend, but you're actually not. And then you can simulate failures, you can do all kinds of things, and your tests are amazingly fast, and the list of benefits just goes on.
Right. I'm a big fan of dependency injection.
Because some people hate it.
Coming from the Java world, it was a lifesaver with static
Yes.
typing and so on. And so I went to your Ajax talk, and I said, okay, this is the MVC framework I'm going to use.
Okay.
And then I told my client, I just want to try this one and not evaluate any of the others. Is that okay? And they said, okay. So here I am. But,
Awesome.
But one of the things that I've been trying to work out in my head is, just to understand the dependency injection.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's comparing it with Spring. And I just wanted to know if anybody's written anything or done anything that's like a compare and contrast.
Okay, so differences.
Between the two.
No, there's differences. So I think the closest that we would come from the Java world is Pico container. Pico container has this concept of, everything is a singleton with a specific injector. And the way you get shorter-lived objects is you make another Pico container that points to the parent Pico container, and then you just throw away that Pico container when the set of objects that you live is unneeded. So that's the closest comparison we would come. Spring is more of a setter injection historically / XML, which we don't do. Juice has more of a module system, so it's kind of closer to, because we have a module system as well. But it's a complicated question because we're not a full-fledged dependency injection frameworks. We can't do many things that these other frameworks can do. We just do bare enough to kind of make building applications super easy.
Right. I'll get you more on this
Yes,
later.
you can
Thank
grab
you.
me after the talk. I'm happy to chat more.
Hi, a couple of questions. One is the localization. Where does it get? How does it handle that? Does it handle time zones also, managing the different time zones and the time offsets? The other is the support in terms of desktop, mobile.
Okay.
How does?
So Igor, you done the localization stuff, so you can maybe jump in on that.
Sure. So with the localization, we all the filters and all the things that are very locale sensitive have been written in a way that you can reconfigure depending on the current locale in the browser, or actually depending on the current locale loaded with AngularJS. So you can say AngularJS behave as if you were in German locale, and now all the date filters and all the currency symbols, they're going to be localized for the German environment. When it comes to time zone, that is tricky because browser assumes that the current time zone of the browser is the current time zone where the user is. So that's what we do right now. And it works for pretty much for all the applications where you are fixed to the user's locale. There are other things we do for localization.
I just want here's a quick show.
Yeah.
This is US locale right here. This is how this set of items, these 3 items over here, how are they formatted in US locale, and this is a Slovak locale, and this is how they get formatted over there.
Yeah.
So we do many things out of the
We
box.
do pluralization. I don't know if you're familiar, but like many different countries have different pluralization rules. So we know about these rules and can help you do the pluralization right. That's about it.
That's about it, I think.
On the so how would you configure that? Is it like probably a back?
So right now, we distribute Angular with English locale. If you want to use different locale, we have a tiny little file that contains just the rules for particular locale. So you just load that file in addition to AngularJS.
But I think the question is, how do you do it? And that's through dependency injection, right?
Okay.
These services simply say, I need a locale, and it's not my problem. How do you get it to me? And the magic of dependency injection hands you a locale, which you can then use.
Okay.
And so in your test, you can easily override locales and all the magic that comes with it.
Okay. Okay. And then the support in terms of desktop versus mobile. How much support?
We run on all mobile, modern mobile devices, so iOS devices, Android devices, BlackBerry devices. There's nothing mobile specific inside of our code base. So the biggest issue is that you have to write your directives for multi-touch gestures for mobile that's not out of the box available. But there is a jQuery mobile adapter for Angular that somebody from the community has done a wonderful job in. So
Sencha Touch.
Sencha
adapter
Touch
as well.
also. I've heard good things. I haven't used it.
Okay.
Check it out.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, 2 questions. The first one, I noticed that in GApp, the attribute breaks HTML validation. Do you have a work?
Yes.
Did you try classes and data.js, stuff like that?
Yeah.
Or do you have if you want to validate your HTML, what do you do on that?
Yeah, what would you do, Igor?
So actually,
Here you go.
there are many different requirements we got from people. Like there are people who want valid HTML5. There are people who want valid XHTML. There are people who use the templates in different environments. So we decided that the way we want directives to work is that we'll give you many different ways to invoke them, and they'll just do the same thing. So we settled that on the ng- syntax. So you can do ng-app, ng-repeater to invoke the repeater. But you can also do ng: repeater, which works well for XHTML. So you can just define ng namespace and then use ng: repeater, and it's going to do the same thing. In HTML5, you can use the data dash prefix, so you can do data dash ng dash repeater.
Oh, cool.
And if you really care about validity of your template, you can invoke the directives that way.
Sweet. And the last question, do you have come up with any ways to make that degrade gracefully? Like, for example, like a search engine comes that doesn't have JavaScript enabled, it's going to see all the template.
Yeah.
So the applications we are targeting are usually applications that do require JavaScript. We are building interactive applications. For interactive applications, you do need JavaScript. Of course, there are use cases when SEO is needed and when you want to make the application crawlable. There are some hacks to get stuff done. We use that for docs AngularJS. It's completely crawlable, and Google can find it. I can send you a link afterwards. There is a spec for crawling Ajax applications. It's not ideal, but it works in some cases. What we are thinking about is that because Angular is so declarative, it shouldn't be too difficult to create a server-side story for Angular, which would enable us to pre-render stuff on the server side. So use the same templates on the server side, fill them with data, and speed them to crawlers, or even speed up the first load by pre-rendering stuff on the server side. But it hasn't happened yet. We are thinking about it.
Way down the line.
Yeah. Yes.
Unless somebody wants to come and work on this particular problem. Brad, you want to hire somebody? Where's Brad?
The open source community would love to introduce you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we like contributors.
Hi, I have one question, but first I wanted to say thank you. AngularJS is great fun to work with and works extremely well with CoffeeScript.
Make sure you tell your friends.
So let's see. So the question is about deep linking and routing in controllers. So when you showed your example with routing and for an ID, and you had, for each route, you had a separate controller. But you could have the same controller for multiple routes. And I just wanted to ask about reloading the scope when you switch between routes to the same controller. Say you just had an ID that you wanted to...
Yeah. So it often comes up. If you look at the documentation of the route, there's a special tag. You can say reload on search or something like that when you set to true, and then we reuse the controller instance. Oh, yes. Then we reuse the controller instance so that you don't have the issue with Flickr and all that other stuff. I think that's what you're asking for, right?
Yeah, it wasn't so much Flickr, but it was that same idea. It was basically having it do more work to reload variables between, and especially if you just wanted, say, to give a bookmarkable deep linking URL that basically didn't actually change anything logically.
Yeah, and keep in mind that this is done through a routing service, and you don't have to use the routing service. You can always go down to the location service, which is below the route, and you can manage the whole URLs yourself, so you can do whatever you want over there. Did I mention that Angular is extensible, and you can replace any part you don't like?
Thank you.
So guys that ask questions, feel free to pick up a t-shirt.
Oh, yeah, everybody.
Voita's going to help you. Can you Voita come here?
Yes. For those of you who guys asked the question,
just
please
come
get a t-shirt.
Two connected questions. I working on this.
And a sticker.
I work on this full time. Like you have 4 guys here in the team.
Yes, 4 of us are working on it full time. Yes.
Do you have some success stories? You deployed some applications in Google, or maybe some other big
We
applications?
do. Dairy Queen cakes. Apparently, Dairy Queen cakes is done in Angular. We have several. We actually, a lot of people within Google are using us. Most of it is done for internal applications, but we have a couple of applications that are pretty big that are going to go public soon. Hopefully, and so we'll be able to talk about it
It's
then.
killing us that we
Yes.
can't talk about these applications.
But they're big.
Thank you.
No toys here.
Okay, so let's move on to the second part of the meetup. So was that? Okay. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Igor. I've been on the project with Mishko for about 2 years now, and I'm very happy that this is coming to life and people are getting more and more excited about the stuff that we do. So what I prepared, and actually what Brad prepared, Brad, our manager, created applications for us. So Angular is awesome, and even managers can build applications with it. Good job, Brad. Okay, so let's go back to the application. So memory game, very simple. We have a bunch of cards. We have pairs of cards, and we're trying to match them by flipping cards. We can only turn 2 cards at the same time, and when we don't find a match, the third card will cause the previous 2 cards to switch back. Super simple stuff. Very exciting when you're a 6-year-old. So let's look how this application is built. I'm not going to go into details too much, but I just want to show you. I have a bunch of files, and the main one is the index.html. This is the file that... Yes? Yes, please. Yes, thank you. Is that better?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. So I have index.html, which is the main file that has been loaded by the browser with AngularJS, ng-app, and all the good stuff that Mishko mentioned. One thing we haven't seen before is that now I'm defining that I actually have a module that this application requires in order to function. So I'm defining, I'm telling Angular that it should load the memory game application while it's bootstrapping. Everything else is the same. I have the controller that will load, that will provide context for my application. And then I have a very simple template with some data binding to display number of pairs that needs to be matched. What is the currently, what is the card that we're trying to match in this attempt? And then we have this table, which is rendered with table tags and tr and td with nested repeaters. So again, you can compose the directives, you can nest them, and in this case we are nesting ng repeats to create rows and tables. I have ng click to trigger to provide a handler for my event, for the click event, and then this is a piece of div that is responsible for providing the HTML needed for the card to render, which is then styled using CSS to do all these animations. So the animations are done by CSS. This is super simple. Let's have a look at game.js. So game.js is a file where all the business logic lives.
One time, bigger.
Thank you, guys. So one thing you should notice is that this file doesn't contain any calls to Angular. There's absolutely nothing Angular specific in this file. What I have here is a tile model and a game model. These are simple objects, actually custom types in JavaScript that are just responsible for providing the code necessary for business logic of my application. So I have a tile with some properties, and then I have a game which takes an array of tile names to create a deck, create a grid, and all that good stuff. And then I have some methods that provide the logic. So what happens when one card is flipped, what happens when the second card is flipped. I'm not going to go through this, but it's very simple, and it's pure JavaScript. This is just business logic. Nothing Angular specific. What this means is that it's very easy to test because you don't need to do DOM manipulation in your tests. You don't need to call any kind of APIs, provide any kind of setup. Your tests are going to be as simple as pure your business logic is going to be. So if you look at the tests, I'm going to zoom in. Ta-da! We are big on testing at Angular because we believe that in order to build maintainable applications, especially large applications, testing these applications and having an automated testing suite is the only way to stay sane. So we go out of our way. We provide dependency injection. We do most of the DOM manipulation for you, so you don't need to test it. And we help you shape your application and structure it in a way that is testable. Another thing that we help you with is provide tooling. So we recommend using Jasmine for writing your tests. Anybody familiar with Jasmine? Okay, some fans. Perfect. So Jasmine is just a simple library that provides DSL for writing tests. So what you can do is you can say, describe something before each. So this is going to be executed before each test, and it should create a 2x2 grid. So in this very readable way, you can write tests for your application and document it along the way, because these tests actually tell a story, tell you what the application is doing. And then you have some assertions APIs provided by Jasmine that allow you to do expectations. So is it this, is it that? Let's do this kind of thing, and how the model changed. Is it or what it is expected? So these are the tests, very simple stuff. And the tests are very easy to write because the model is very pure. When we look at app.js, app.js is second file. that contains all the Angular specific stuff. So this is where I'm defining my module that I mentioned. So I'm saying, oh, Angular create a module called memory game and assign it to this variable. And then I'm going to create a service. Mishko mentioned services just a little bit. This time it's a game service, and game service is going to instantiate a new instance of my game domain object, and it's going to return it. So when my controller is going to ask, so I have a game controller, and the game controller, let me just wrap this. The game controller is asking through dependency injection for scope and game, and the game is what is coming from this service. This is what we created. And all the controller is doing is just publishing the instance of game on scope so that it's available to templates. And I have some other stuff here that I'll show you. But this is everything. This is my entire application. And what I got is, something that somebody can actually play. Any questions about this that I can answer right now? Nothing? Okay, so let's move on. We really touched just the surface of what Angular can do. And Mishko mentioned already that the templating and directives are extensible by you. So what I'm going to show you is, wouldn't it be nice if instead of this ugly club of divs and stuff, I could just say, let's put card here. And it should just do the right thing. So what this means is we want to create a component. We want to create a component that is reusable, that will be translated into something that the browser knows how to render. And we can also provide, we want this component to work with the data binding that Angular provides. And maybe we want to provide some behavior or something like that. So how would we do this with Angular? And this is where Angular directives come along. So what I'm doing is I'm defining a new directive called mgcard. I said card here, but we really recommend that you use namespaces. So it should be mgcard, it's a memory game card. And the directive declaration is quite simple. What we are saying is that we want the directive to work as an element, so we're creating a new element. This is the template that is going to back this directive. And then we have some scope wiring definition down here. And what it allows us to do, I'm just going to copy paste this guy here. It allows us to put something like this into a template. And we actually want to bind this component to the current tile that is provided by the repeater, so that we want it to be truly reusable and not something that depends on the current context. And that's why we have the tile equals tile here. If I go to my browser, refresh, everything still works. Hey, nice. But what does it mean creating all these components? So is it just about creating HTML that is more readable? Yeah, that's part of it. Like you can have your designer that is working on just components, and he's really dealing with the div and the CSS and creating the structure and making everything look pretty. And then you have the application developer that just uses these reusable components and places them on page. But it also means that I can take the same component and use it in a different context. So let's say we have this part here where we display what is the currently matching card that we're trying. So what if we just dropped in a magic and our magic, well, it's a magic too, mgcard directive here, but this time we'll bind it to game.firstPick, which if you look at the model, it's just it's a pointer to the first pick you made in the turn. Now if I refresh my application, I have this extra card here, which is turned, and it's actually gonna do the right thing. So every time I am in a new turn, it's gonna point and it's gonna display what is the currently matching card that we are trying to match. And all I had to do is just reuse the same component that I already created for something completely different. This is very important for big applications because you can create the small components that you can then reuse in different parts of the application. Another piece that is super important, and I touched on it and I show you the test, is Testing is good when you know how to do it, but it's even better when it's very smooth and it actually helps you do stuff. So I'm gonna uncomment. This is the test for the directive, and just to show you, you can test everything in Angular. And somebody asked the question about testing these directives. So this is actually a test for the MG card directive. Just a very simple test to give you an idea of what it would look like. So I'm saying describe the MG card directive, and it should render card using divs and bind to a tile. And the funny thing is that I can actually reuse dependency injection from Angular in my tests. So I can say within this little test, inject a $compile and $root scope, which are services that Angular internally uses, and which you might use as you build, as your application grows and you're starting to do more advanced stuff. And you can use these services to write your tests. So what I'm doing here is I just create a fake tile using the constructor, and I'm going to assign the tile model to I'm going to assign the tile to the tile model, and then I'm going to use the $compile service, which is a service that Angular internally uses to compile all templates, to compile this small snippet of a template. And I'm going to bind it to the root scope. I'm going to bind it to the root scope, and what I'm going to get out is the compiled DOM. I'm going to call root scope apply, which is just something that will just trigger all the bindings and make sure that everything is initialized. And then I can run my assertions, so I can check: does the element have the right structure, and are the proper values present in place of bindings? So you can very much test components. You can easily test the business logic because it's really just very simple. You can test services. Everything's testable. What is really cool, however, we have some nifty tools. When you write a test, you can run the tests and execute them in the browser. So the whole time I had this in the background, I have Chrome running here that is pointing to a server called Testacular. Testacular is a test runner, spectacular test runner. That's where the name comes from, just so that nobody's confused. And what it allows you to do is it takes a browser, captures it, and sends scripts to the browser to be executed, collects the results, and displays them in a console or in some other format. And this allows you to run tests in a browser without you having to open an HTML file and go into the browser and hit in Control refresh every time. So Testacular can actually watch the file system and see and be configured so it knows which files are your application files. And anytime the application file or the test file changes, it will just send a command to the browser to run all tests. So, and that's what's happening here. Every time I change something, I hit save. You see down here, and I'm trying, I don't know if the zoom is gonna, oh, it does work here. Awesome. Maybe not. No, it doesn't work well. So anyway, every time I save, every time I make a change, let's comment this out, and it's going to blow up. It's going to say, oh, there's a test that is failing. There's a stack trace, and WebStorm is actually quite good IDE, so I can click on the links in the stack trace, and it will lead me to the part of the application that caused the test to fail. And I can go and fix it, and it's going to rerun it. And hey, the test is passing now. Let's see if all tests are passing. Yes, they are. So if you have this setup, and we provide you these tools, and we provide you guidelines how to do all this setup, it's very easy to do test-driven development. And we think it's very much necessary to do it if you are serious about your application. So this is what we do. This is how we develop Angular. We have 1,500 tests that test Angular itself and make sure that all the DOM manipulation, all the dependency injection that we do work properly. And we run all these tests every time we make a change and save a file. So in Chrome, I think it takes like 5 seconds to run 1,500 tests, which is awesome. 1,500 tests. You can do it on every save. And it actually gets better. You can say, oh, just run this test with some tricks. So I mark it as IIT, and it's going to run just this one, or I can I can do the describe, and it's just going to run this block. But that's more advanced stuff. So this is how you develop stuff. And last thing I want to show you is how to debug applications, because that's something, if tests fail, and sometimes they do fail, like you try really hard, you write all these tests, but sometimes you miss something, or sometimes it's not clear why a test is failing. So you want a good debugging story with Angular. And because Angular is really just DOM and JavaScript, it's really easy to debug. So what I'm going to show you here is, let's say I have this tile. I can inspect these elements, so just using the web inspector in Chrome, Safari, Firebug, even in IE, but in IE it's tricky. The debugging story in IE is horrible, but it's not our fault. So what I can do is I can just get the scope or the context of this particular element. So what I'm going to do is Angular element 0 scope. So this will retrieve the scope that is associated with this DOM element. And now I can check what is the tile. And this is actually the model that is backing this one tile. Do I need to zoom this in? Well, I think this is the best I can do. Okay, let's go with this. So I can check flipped. Flipped property controls what's the current status of the card. Currently it's false. Well, what if it was true? So I set it to true and nothing happened. When nothing happened, because Angular doesn't know that you changed the model, this is something that behind the scenes just work, but because I'm hacking in the console, I need to tell Angular that the model changed. So I just called it up $apply. This is going to tell Angular, hey, model changed, go and figure out what changed. And as you see, the tile changed and magic just happened. So I can just turn it back. Ta-da! So this is, you get full access to the model. There's a question? Can you?
I think the question was, how did you get access to the scope? You should talk about the $0.
Okay, so one more time. I click on any kind of element in Angular application. I click inspect element, and now I go to the console. Okay, I go to the console, and in the console, if you hit the $0 in Web Inspector and also in Firebug, you get a reference to the selected element. This is something that is Chrome and Safari and Firebug specific. This is not what we do. But what I do is I call Angular element, wrap it into either jQuery, JQLite, whatever the application is currently using for the DOM manipulation. And there is a method called scope, which if you call, you get access to the scope. So I assign it to S, temporary variable, and now I can check the properties, I can change them, and I can call the $apply to have this, take effect. So this is how you can check the scope, the status of the scope, how you can interact with the application. I mentioned that your code is just JavaScript, so you can use the standard debugging tools for JavaScript, which is let's put a breakpoint somewhere. Let's do game and flip dial. Okay, so flip dial. This is method. This is a method that is called every time we flip a card. So I'm going to click on a card. The breakpoint was hit, and now I can just look at the watch variables, the call stack, and just do all the awesome stuff that you can do in Web Inspector or Firebug.
What if I want to see where all the scopes are?
What was that? Oh, that's another good question. So another thing that we allow you to is see where the scopes are, and we put CSS classes as flags on things, on like elements that are significant for directives or elements that contain binding. So if you know what these flags are called, and for example, we have ng scope class, Oops, it needs to be dot, dot, dot. And now I can do border, and it should be 1 pixel solid red. So I added a CSS rule to my document, and now every element that has a new scope attached to it has a red border. So now I can visualize and see, oh, okay, repair creates a new scope for every iteration, and I can use this for debugging. We do the same thing for data binding. We do the same thing for controllers, and there are some other things. So this is how you debug applications. This is how you develop. This is how you test applications. Questions? We have a question here.
Yeah, at the test-driven development meetup last week, you showed a tool chain for doing multi-browser unit testing for AngularJS.
Yeah.
And essentially, you're using Jenkins to call Testacular, which calls Jasmine, and then basically the Jasmine tests will run in multiple browsers.
Yeah.
And are you doing that? Are you doing the multiple browser tests on every check-in or every save?
So this is about a CI environment. We do it on every. So it's actually pretty crazy, and I could spend the whole evening just talking about how our CS server works. But we have, I think, 7 browsers that are configured on the CS server, which we run all tests in for each push.
Maybe you can show the CI server.
I can show it to you. Let's see. If this is going to crash, then sure.
I don't think that will prevent you.
Yeah.
You can at least go to the website, CI.
Don't we have a video of this? So while I'm loading this, we have 7 browsers. Oh yeah, and on every push to GitHub, we are watching certain repositories. So like my repository is watched, Mishko's, Vojta's, and also the master repository is being watched. And every time we push stuff to any of these watched repositories, we run a build. And the build will run in all the browsers, and will run unit tests and also end-to-end tests. So end-to-end test is something that I haven't mentioned here, but we also have an end-to-end testing story. So this is just a video. I can send you a link to this. Do we have? Yeah, youtube.com/AngularJS, and you can find the video there. It's described. It talks about JS test driver, which we have been using, and we partially still use on the test server, but we are transitioning to Testacular.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're doing all this testing, I was just wondering if you've tried it with Phantom.js, or if you know people use that for their testing.
I heard of people using it. We don't use Phantom.js for one reason, and that is browser compatibility issues. We actually want to make sure that Angular works in IE, it works in Chrome, it works on Android. So Phantom is good if you just want to quickly see if the tests are working at all. But to make sure that the DOM manipulation is done in the right way, you actually need to run it on a real browser.
And I have a question about the elements.
Mm-hmm.
And in the example, you had an element that was made with a string concatenation.
Yes, that's optional. We are talking about this part,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, there are 2 ways how you can define templates. One is using as a string concatenation, which works for smaller things, but for bigger things, it's actually better to use a script tag, as many other libraries use. So what you can do is, this is not going to work right now. I'm just going to show you what it would look like. I'm not sure if I can get it to work right now. Script type, do text, AngularJS. No, ng template, ng-template, ID, and I give it an ID, mg card.html, and I paste this here. Well, actually, let's try to get it to work. So remove the quotes.
You're brave.
Let's see. Is this gonna break? Is it gonna break? Okay. And if I go to the application instead of a template, I do template URL and do mg-car.html, and I go to my application. It doesn't work. mg-card index.
Okay, but so
This is the idea.
Okay, so but it has to be in the same page.
It doesn't.
Okay, so you can load it from a different HTML file.
Yeah.
Okay, and another question, what about an element inside an element so that you can create complex elements?
Sure. I already showed you how you can nest ng repeats. I showed you how you can use ng repeat with nested mg card, and you can do the same thing with you can put stuff here. Like you can go really crazy with directives, and actually people complain that directives are too complex. They are, because there are many different ways in which you want to use them, and that's why we have to have all these knobs to allow you to do crazy things.
Thank you.
On a related note, to what you're doing there, do people generate the AngularJS templates server side at all, or pretty much everyone's just?
So we already had a similar question. What people usually do is they have the index.html file generated on the server side, so they can version their files and do some simple stuff on the server side. But all the rendering is done, all the templating is done on the client side. For simple applications like these, you don't have to do it. Are you asking specifically about pre-rendering or about just doing some kind of DOM manipulation or changing the template on the server?
Yeah, like changing the template server side.
For what purpose? To
To
pre-render so it's faster on the first load, or so that you can add version numbers to the template, or?
yeah, different things like that.
So people usually use the server-side templating only for versioning, so that you can have like Angular whatever version on your application and version all your files dynamically. That's what people usually use, the server-side templating. For most applications that we use, everything's done on the client side. If they do stuff during the deployment, it's they minify stuff. They combine templates into one file and create one large file which is just pushed to the server, to the browser, so that you don't need to make 10 requests to fetch different templates. And that kind of stuff is done on the server side.
Yeah, so it might not be covered in this application, but you're binding stuff to elements, so they react. Could you make an app with Angular that's open for 365 days without crashing the browser? And yeah, basically that. So are you doing cleanup, garbage collection?
Oh yeah, we do a lot of stuff with garbage collection. You have no idea.
Yeah, you have no idea. So
I just spent the whole week chasing leaks, and it was actually finding the leak is easy. I was just getting jQuery and all the other libraries to kind of cooperate with you.
So one thing,
yeah, we do all that stuff.
I mentioned that our test suite is quite extensive. So part of the stuff that we test is make sure that we don't leak stuff. We don't leak memory, or we don't retain DOM nodes or anything that would prevent garbage collection from working properly. This is happening every time we change anything. So we definitely care about these things. We also monitor larger applications and see how they behave as the data grows and as they are used for longer periods of time. We fix some issues, but we are not aware of any major memory leaks right now. If you find some, let us know and we'll fix it. Like, these are things that we definitely want to fix right away.
Okay, thank you.
You showed this custom tag, mg card. Did you saw I think in HTML there is some draft like for templates, and I think Google guys also like submitted the draft.
Very, very good question. So instead of the script tags, so the reason why everybody's using script tags is because you want inert DOM. Inert DOM is a DOM that is not going to start pulling images, is not going to start executing scripts, is not going to do things that the typical DOM that is instantiated from HTML would do, because it's a template. The links are meaningless, links pointing to images until they are populated with values. So script is the current hack we have, so people just use it. There are proposals how to do this properly. One of them is part of the web component spec, and it's the template element. So template element will provide us real tools in the browser that will allow us to embed pieces of HTML without causing extra requests to the server to fetch bogus images and stuff like that.
Okay.
So and once that is available, we'll definitely start using that.
Okay, some like simple, maybe not very important question. Did you discuss your framework with other like Google guys like Paul Irish, Paul Kinlan, Eric Bildman? Do they have some feedback? Did they participate in it, not participate? Alex Russell.
Yes, all these people, we talk to them all the time.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we are friends with them, and they like us very much. So yeah, we work together, and one of the things we did just recently was the content security policy. Like when we implemented content security policy in Angular, we realized that there is no way to feature detect if CSP is enabled. So we talked to these guys, and they hooked us up with the right people, and now there is a spec pending that will add feature detection. So this is the kind of stuff that we...
Spec pending for feature detection?
So content security policy.
Okay, what is that?
So it's this special mode that is actually really cool, and if you don't know about it, you should look it up. It allows you to specify what are the expected things that should happen in your application. For example, my application should really fetch images only from my server and not some other server. Or my application should execute scripts only from my server and Google+. So this is a policy that you can define, and then the browser will execute your application within the context of this policy and will prevent any kind of malicious code to fetch third-party JavaScript or third-party images. This is it's called content security policy, and there's no way to feature detect it. So that's something we work together on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Good. So we have two more demos, short demos. One is Vojta's going to show us a real application. The applications we showed you today so far are really just toy applications, examples. They don't tell you much about what can you build. Vojta's going to show something more substantial, and then we have Robert. I don't know where Robert is. Oh, right there. He's going to show us a cool application they are building with Angular in his startup. Vojta? So while Vojta's setting up, guys, come get your t-shirts.
We just tried the breath for some data. Sure. So don't go to the coffee link. You have to go to the... Where's the other link?
This will be a good time to stretch your legs, get something to drink, finish the food, chat with your neighbor.
425 314. Thanks. Cupcake.
Go to your office.
You're stressing me out. I'm glad I did. Should I gather up the troops with them?
I'm sorry? I think we're ready to go.
think that's okay. Sorry? I think it's all ready. Sure.
Okay, let's get going. Vojta, show us the amazing stuff you've been working on.
Cool. Well,
So this is actually an application that was originally written by Eric Bilderman from the DevRel team, and Vojta rewrote it. Well, Eric rewrote it in Angular.
Eric
and
wrote
then
this application
Vojta did
actually,
some more.
and I wrote some more unit tests for it and stuff like that. But basically, Eric from Chrome Dev Relation team wrote this application. I would love to say that I'm gonna show you like a real app, right? But I mean, it is a real app, but it's not that big. But at least there is some real stuff like communication with the server and stuff like that, so you can see that you can possibly build something real. So this application is RSS reader. So you basically load some data from server, and you transform these data to some model, and you show them to user. So on the left side, you have some sort of navigation. I can click on items, and it displays some detail of the blog post. I can here on the left side, there's some navigation, so you can go to next or previews. You can mark particular blog post as your favorite. We can mark some more favorites, and then you can display just your favorites one, those you start, or you can display only unread or read. And you can use keyboard as well for navigation. So I can press arrow down or button to navigate. And another nice feature is that you can use spacebar, which will scroll the detail of the post, and once the post is at the bottom of the page, it will move to the next one. Cool. You can do search as well. So as long as you type, oops. Seems to be weird. Okay, this is a better example. So as you can see, as long as I'm typing, it's filtering the post. So I think this is pretty much all the features it has. Maybe I can the data that you get are from in JSON format. And
so can you show the structure of this application? You don't have to go deep into what the code looks like, but just how it's structured.
So you want to see controllers, services,
just
code?
High-level overview of
Okay.
the big pieces.
So this whole application is actually 250 lines of JavaScript code, and it's 250 lines of testable JavaScript code. As you can see on the left side, I've got some unit tests.
So the core of the application, I think the first thing you want to see is the index.html, which is the main template. So here's the header with the main navigation displaying. That's the main navigation displaying either the posts that are already read, or posts that are marked as favorite, or posts that are unread.
Can you zoom?
Oh, sure. Let me make this bigger. I think this is gonna be better. How about this?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Good point. So then we get to the main section. This is again the navigation on the left side, where you go up and down. And here is the core. Here's the ng repeat over all items, over all filtered items. And here is the detail of each post. And
can you show what the controllers look like?
Yeah, this is just footer. So here are the controllers. The controllers are very lightweight. It's basically the most of the logic is stored in service, which we called items, and I will show it in a second. So most of the controllers are just tiny methods that just wrappers for method calls to this service that contains most of the logic. Yeah, nothing else here. So here's the core service called items. There's a bunch of methods. The first that we are probably interested in is get items from server, which calls HTTP service to get the data from server. As you saw in previous talks, HTTP service is something that is injected, so you just ask for it here in the constructor, and you get it from dependency injection. So that means that if you want to unit test this service, that's something that we do.
So what if I want to minify this code? How is the dependency injection going to work?
If you want to minify this code, you can do that. The only thing you have to do is specify doing something like this, which basically tells dependency injection which services to inject. Because once you minify this file, all these names, all these variables will be minified. It's going to be something like A, B, C, and stuff like that.
This is optional, right? So if I'm not minifying code, I don't need to do it.
If you are not minifying, this whole stuff doesn't have to be here. So you can remove this part, and it's still going to work. Yep. I don't know. I even didn't want to go through this code, so I can show you some more methods, but
Show us a test for how do you mock out the server.
sure. So I will show you a unit test for this service, which is core of the whole application. Spec. So before each of those tests, I load module services that contains all my services. And here's the interesting part. I have something. This application, I actually didn't mention that, but this application uses local storage as well for backing up data and storing the information, which items you already marked as favorite and which items you already read. And this local storage is actually service called store. So during unit testing of this service, I don't want to deal with local storage. So I mock this whole service out. And this is the object that's like empty object that does nothing. Basically, an object with a bunch of no-op functions. Angular.noop is just empty function. So that's the first thing. I'm mocking out this store service so that I don't have to deal with real local storage. And another thing is this line, where I'm basically saying, hey, HTTP, expect request to this URL, which is block chromium something, and respond some data. This data, I actually have this data in a separate file, and it's just dumped from the server so that I know that it works. And then I test the service, whether all the methods do what they are supposed to do. And it's just simple plain JavaScript, nothing else then.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any questions for this? And I would ask Robert to get set up in the meantime.
If you want to see the source code, it's on GitHub, so feel free to check it out.
We'll send out links.
Yep.
Got to click the red green button.
Oh, sorry. You want this number, I guess. Oh, it's.
Okay. We're not going to record this.
Yeah, it won't work.
Yeah. So Robert, can you introduce yourself and the company you work for?
So I'm Robert, and this is Ben here. We are a small startup up in San Francisco. So we've, to steal a joke I just heard, we've crossed time zones and borders and got our passports to come down here. So, so am I up on this thing? Awesome. All right. So first off, thank you for hosting this meetup, and to the core team, to the community for Angular, because it's just an amazing tool that's really helped us as like a small lean team build a really amazing thing that we're going to show you in just a minute here. Yes, this says we have made a Skype client using AngularJS, which took a lot of madness and made it really sane. So about us, I'm actually going to let Ben give you a little rundown about what Colingo is. He's our amazing co-founder and can give you just the quick 30-second of the context as to why we're doing this crazy thing of building a Skype application with Angular.
So thank you, everyone. Just to give you a little bit of context about Colingo and what we're up to. So we see a really massive problem worldwide that you don't see here too often. But how many people learned English growing up, not in the country or kind of as a second language? So you'll understand the problem we're talking about, which is that for people worldwide who need to learn English, it's really difficult to get the kind of advanced speaking and listening practice that's really important for being able to use it at a company like Google, or use it for job interviews, or use it for many other purposes. And so what we're doing is enabling that online, drastically reducing the price of high quality English tutoring, making English more accessible to people. Currently this is a $50 billion market. It's really huge, so we're looking to disrupt it by offering a much higher quality service at a lower price for people.
Thanks, Ben. So the sneak preview here is there's a thing called Speak Assist that's in our tutor application. So Skype is a core part of the solution because we basically need to connect learners with tutors. They need to speak with each other. Right now it's just audio, not video. So we've decided to use Skype for this because it's like the most commonly used tool for doing this. It's very reliable until WebRTC is like the norm. So if anybody here is working on WebRTC, come talk to us. So we need to build a custom Skype client for this. The learners just use their regular Skype client, but when they're talking to our tutors, the tutors have essentially a special version of Skype that empowers them to be really effective English tutors. Okay, so developing for Skype. This is the part that's the madness. It's a distributed application. Do you guys remember Kazaa file sharing program. Skype is actually built more or less on the same technology that Kazaa used. It's the same team of guys that built Kazaa. They made Skype. So it's something really interesting to work with, right? Skype is very distributed. There's no master server. Like the only thing that's centralized about Skype is your login authentication. Everything else is distributed across nodes in the network. So when you're using Skype, your good chances you're actually relaying a call for somebody else. So this is actually kind of hard to program for because objects can change at any time. They have lots of properties. Like when you look at the Skype API, this is a beta program Skype has, by the way, called SkypeKit. I think you just have to sign up for it. I don't think it's super exclusive or anything, right? You guys should check it out. There's just, obviously lots of iterations of their like API still hanging around. So there's always objects that change all the time. There's all this like crap laying around. So how do you kind of like, cut through it and basically build an application with this? Well, it turns out that data binding is really perfect for this because we can observe all those properties and then from the ones that we care about, build descriptive combinations. A lot of what I'm going to echo here about why Angular has been so good for us is the things that Misko talked about earlier about just like this declarative, descriptive, directive bound things. So, for example, this is a little Angular 101. Here's how we've tamed some of the Skype madness with Angular. So there's something called local live status, which is kind of the bane of my existence working with Skype right now. This is the thing that essentially says, am I in a call or not? Well, turns out that that property can have like 20 different values and they all mean different things in different situations. But after trial and error, we found out that, if it's a none or recently alive, it means you can call. But it also means you can't hang up. So we basically boiled down this really complex situation into these very descriptive properties, which is very, very useful for building an application on top of that. We feel this is huge because, it makes it really easy for anybody to jump in, which is great for us as a small team because we've built this really cool application that we're about to show you, basically hand in hand. You've worked on it for a little bit, handed it back to me, and you don't always have to get all the way down in the guts of figuring out what that local live status thing means. You just work on like the known good states that we've figured out. And we feel like this is a watershed moment. Goal-based example. All right, so this is how we do it in our team. Very goal-based, iterative-based product testing. I mean, we're at Google. You guys know about this. So the goal was, okay, the interface should look like this when I can call but can't hang up. And then when I can't call but can hang up, it should look like this. Well, with Angular, it's as easy as this. Like, wow, 2 lines of code like changes the interface between these 2 different states. That's awesome. So this approach has allowed us to build a custom Skype client using common web technologies. Well, how the heck do we do that? So it's actually quite a lot of layers, which actually fits with the idea of Angular being like lots of layers. So way up at the top here, you've got this distributed Skype network with all this data coming out of it into the Skype runtime. And then they provide a Python library, which we decided to use because it was a lot easier than their C library, it turns out. So from there, we go enter into the Qt world. Does anybody here do work with Qt? Just curious? Okay. It's great because it's a really good way to build like cross-platform native applications, but building an application that dealt with all this like data issues of Skype it sounded like a real like nightmare. We're like really not looking forward to doing that. But then we discovered you can bring up an instance of WebKit inside of Qt, and that was just like this like holy moment of like, ah, and wow, everything got a lot easier because we had already been using Angular. We met Misko and Vyuta at Node Summit a couple months ago, and so we knew about Angular, and we started to use it. So now's demo time. So. Is anybody here on Skype right now? Because that would be a great demo. I'm going to add you as a buddy using what you're looking at is our custom Skype client. So on the left here, I've got my buddy list. Yeah, if somebody who can get on Skype the fastest. It's a race. Who can remember their Skype ID the fastest? That's the question.
Yeah, it's just my voice number, VOJTA dot JINA. Yeah.
All right. Okay, I'm adding you as my contact. You're going to get a message saying that this is your Colingo, your tutor from Colingo. Oh no. Red wheel of death, something bad happened. Oh, this is like that Microsoft Windows moment. Or was that not Windows 98?
Yeah, well, I can see a message from you.
You got the message?
Yeah.
Awesome. Because this other part's not so awesome right now. All right, let's try that again. Yay, we're back. Angular loads really fast. Cool, hey, there you are. You're not registered on our site. So this is a sneak preview of what Ben's going to show you in just a minute here, which is the Speak Assist tools that we've built on top of the Skype experience. All right, so what we're essentially delivering here is the same experience you get in Skype, but now that we've wrapped it inside of our own application, it allows us to deliver all this other value that really is our company. So I think I'm actually, you might have to register to do this actually. Let me see if I can find our registered users real quick here. Yeah. So everything you're seeing in here is all being handled by Angular right now. It's just that at the few points where we have to actually deal with Skype, we let it go outside of Qt into the Python environment and trigger the few methods that we care about. So I'm actually going to have Ben show you this component here because he's the most familiar with this, but man, the screen resolution is really small. These are some really cool tools that we've built with Angular, and we can build these so fast because of how easy it is to do things with Angular. So give it to Ben now.
So, one of our questions is how can we actually bring data to speaking and listening? How can we take what we say in a normal conversation and actually be able to jump out those points where maybe I said something that was incorrect. I used some incorrect grammar, or I mispronounced something, or I used some new word that you never heard before, or I just taught you something, right? So how can we actually take all that information and distill it down into data and then be able to layer that data into like a true form of progress? And that's what we're looking to do with this. So, we think of this as a stack in many ways, and, to continue the stack that Robert was drawing out earlier, which is more technical, we add additional stacks of pedagogy and education on top of that. So, Skype for us, getting that Skype call is the beginning. And then what we're doing on top of that, what we're having our tutors do during calls, this is what Robert's talking about. So, essentially our tutors have the ability in conversation to keep track of and be prompted to take note of all sorts of types of data that may be a problem. So, for example, I don't know if you guys ever know Brazilians who are kind of learning English, but that's our target market, actually. So one of the common problems that Brazilians have is the difference between sort of the short and the long E sounds. So mispronouncing beaches for, the female dog rendition of the same word. And, one of the things that we give to our tutors is the ability to keep track of those kinds of mistakes, to prompt them to know what they are, and then when they hear them to be able to have all kinds of additional help in terms of being able to work on those with learners. So.
Thanks, Ben. So, that's the quick rundown there. This is just, a production application that only crashes once in a while, built in Angular, and that is just really delivering, these awesome features that we can prototype and build so quickly. And it's really easy for us to divide up that work amongst the team, which is important because we're small. and it's really important that anybody can jump in. And with the semantics provided by Angular, that's really cool. Any questions? Anybody want to really know how Skype works?
How many tests do you have for your application?
This one doesn't have any tests actually.
Why?
Because it was written, believe it, in about 2 weeks, I think.
Why?
Because we need more help, and all interested parties should come talk to us who would like to write tests for something like this.
Yeah, there's really no good excuse for this not having tests. Uh-oh, what's this question going to be? Is it about tests?
Do you have tests? No, just kidding. What other technologies did you look at or tried, and how do they compare?
So you're talking specifically about like frameworks, not Skype, right? So we had originally used a lot of Backbone for other components of our system, including the original version of our tutor client, so to speak, which was not a desktop application. It was just something you'd load up in Chrome. We've tried many things throughout the years, and like Backbone felt like it was getting us the closest, but there was just still so much shenanigans of dealing with the DOM, and I just wanted a good reason to be forced to never touch the DOM, and Angular was kind of like one of those first reasons. But really, there's actually a story here that I think everybody will appreciate. So we met Misko and Viota at Node Summit, and you spent a very good amount of time telling us why we should use it. And it was actually very good that you did that, because about a couple of weeks later, we were presented with the need to write some little application, and we're like, okay, there's Angular or there's Ember. Okay, these two things that look like kind of the next step beyond Backbone, because we had already made some Backbone apps that, were working, but we didn't really like. You took Ember, and I took Angular, and it was like, okay, what can we do before lunch? It was like a shootout, which of these things is gonna prove out the quickest before lunch? And in the time that it took Ben to even make any sense of the Ember side of things, I had written the thing in Angular. There was no turning back since then.
Have you thought about using TalkBox instead of Skype? Because that would be a lot easier to integrate with.
Yeah.
We actually previously used TalkBox. Are you partial to them in any particular way? No. We had a lot of issues using TalkBox. It did not serve the needs of our users. Any Flash-based solution for us won't be reliable enough for the kind of premium experience that we're looking to offer. We're connecting learners from all over the world with other tutors who may be anywhere else in the world, and the actual connection quality, camera and microphone acquisition issues, and a whole slew of other problems with TalkBox were just a little too much for us. That said, I know they have made improvements in the time since we actually used them, but we're really waiting for WebRTC.
Yeah, just a quick technical note on that. So the thing that makes Skype really great is the fact that it is distributed. So with TalkBox, they still have a centralized server essentially, because they're solving the NAT traversal problem by hosting a server, and we did not want to essentially enter into that business of dealing with NAT traversal. So we'll let Skype handle it for us basically. But I'm curious to know what WebRTC is doing about that. So if anybody here wants to talk WebRTC, we should talk. So.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert, for coming and showing us this amazing application. So we have still lots of food here. Your task is to finish it all. You can't leave. I'm serious. I'm going to lock the door. Really, just go grab some food. Come to talk to us if you have other questions. Talk to yourself and use Angular. Be happy. Write tests.